You open the fridge. You stare at it for a second. Nothing looks good. So you order something instead, something with 30 ingredients you can't pronounce, delivered in 20 minutes by a stranger on a bike. This feels normal to you. It is not normal. For almost the entire span of human existence, nobody has ever done this. But the real answer to what your ancestors ate is far stranger than kale and mammoth steaks. You've probably heard this story. Caveman hunts woolly mammoth. Caveman drags mammoth home. Caveman eats meat by the fire. It's a clean picture. It's also mostly wrong. Here's what actually happened. For most of human history, meat was rare, unreliable, a lucky Tuesday, not a daily meal. Your ancestors weren't apex predators sitting at the top of a food chain. They were scavengers, foragers, and occasional hunters, cobbling together calories from whatever the land offered that week. So what were they actually eating? Mostly plants, roots, tubers, nuts, insects, shellfish when they lived near water. Anthropologist Richard Wrangham, who studies the evolutionary role of food, argues that the real turning point wasn't meat at all. It was fire. Once early humans learned to cook, they unlocked calories that raw food simply couldn't give them. Cooked starch breaks down easier. Cooked meat digests faster. Your gut, small and energy-hungry, could suddenly survive on less food and use the extra energy elsewhere. Like growing a bigger brain. Think about that for a second. The device you're using to read this sentence exists partly because your ancestors figured out how to roast a root over a flame. But cooking wasn't the whole story. Diet also depended entirely on geography. Humans near the coast ate differently than humans on the savanna. Humans in Ice Age Europe ate differently than humans in tropical forests. There was no single ancestral diet. There were hundreds of them, shifting with the seasons, the climate, and whatever happened to be edible that month. This is where the modern idea of the paleo diet starts to fall apart a little. It imagines one clean menu. Meat, vegetables, no grains, no dairy. Simple, right? Except archaeological evidence tells a Messier story. In 2010, researchers examining ancient grinding stones in Europe found starch residue on tools dating back over 30,000 years. That means humans were processing grains, wild grains, ground into something like flour, long before farming existed. Long before bread was supposedly invented. The line between hunter-gatherer and farmer wasn't as sharp as we like to imagine. And then there's fat. Not the fat you're picturing. Ancient humans didn't chase animals for muscle meat the way modern hunters do. Bone marrow was often the real prize. Cracked bones, sucked dry of fat and nutrients, show up again and again at ancient campsites. Fat was calorie-dense in a world where calories were never guaranteed. Muscle meat, by comparison, was almost a side dish. You probably don't think about marrow very often, but your ancestors would have fought for it. There's another piece of this that rarely makes it into the popular story: insects. Termites, grubs, larvae. High in protein, easy to gather, available year-round in many climates. Some anthropologists believe insects made up a far larger share of early human diets than meat ever did. It's just less cinematic. Nobody paints a cave mural of a guy eating a beetle. So why does the myth of the meat-eating caveman persist? Partly because meat leaves better evidence. Bones fossilize. Roasted tubers do not. Archaeologists find spear points and butchered animal remains far more often than the plant matter that was actually the daily staple. The evidence is biased toward meat, so the story we tell is biased toward meat too. Here's where it gets stranger. Your body still remembers this uncertainty even if your mind doesn't. Psychologist and researcher Paul Rozin studied what he called the omnivore's dilemma, the built-in anxiety humans feel about new foods. Eat the wrong plant and it might kill you. Skip a good food source and you might starve. That tension shaped how you taste the world today. It's why children instinctively reject bitter vegetables. Bitterness in the ancestral world often meant toxin. Your kid isn't being difficult. Your kid is running very old software. It's also why so many people crave sugar and fat so intensely. For most of human history, those calories were scarce and valuable. A find worth celebrating. Today they're sitting in a vending machine down the hall, and your brain still treats every candy bar like a rare and precious discovery. Now here's the twist that changes everything. The idea of the ancestral human diet may be a modern invention entirely. A story built backward from what we wish was simple. Real human diets were flexible, adaptable, wildly different depending on where and when you were born. That flexibility, that willingness to eat almost anything the environment offered, is arguably the actual ancestral trait. Not meat. Not plants. Adaptability. Which means the healthiest thing about the ancient human diet was never a specific food. It was the range. So what does this mean for you, standing in front of your fridge, overwhelmed by options your ancestors never had to consider? It means the anxiety you feel is old. Older than agriculture. Older than fire maybe. The instinct to weigh risk against reward with every bite is baked into you at a level deeper than culture. It also means the myth of a single perfect ancestral diet, the one sold to you in books and documentaries, misses the actual lesson evolution left behind. Your ancestors didn't survive because they found the right food. They survived because they could eat almost anything, adjust constantly, and never depend on one single source for too long. Consider what this means for something as simple as a grocery store. Row after row. Thousands of options, all safe, all regulated, all available every single day of the year regardless of season. Your ancestors never experienced that. Ever. Food scarcity wasn't an occasional problem for them. It was the baseline condition of being alive. A bad season could mean weeks of hunger. A missed migration of animals could mean months of scraping by on roots and insects. The idea of walking into a room and simply choosing whatever you wanted with no real risk attached would have seemed like a fantasy. That's part of why modern abundance feels so strange to your body, even if your mind has adjusted. You evolved in scarcity. You live in surplus. And the gap between those two conditions explains a lot about modern struggles with food that have nothing to do with willpower or discipline. Take portion size. Ancient humans rarely faced the question of, how much is too much? When food was available, the smart move was to eat as much as possible, because nobody knew when the next meal would come. That instinct, eat now because tomorrow is uncertain, made perfect sense on the savannah. It makes considerably less sense at an all-you-can-eat buffet with fluorescent lighting and unlimited refills. Your body isn't broken. It's just running a survival program in an environment that no longer requires it. There's also the matter of taste itself. Why do fat and sugar taste so good to nearly everyone across nearly every culture? Because both were rare and valuable for almost all of human history. A ripe piece of fruit thick with natural sugar was a jackpot. A source of animal fat was a jackpot too. Your brain rewards you for finding these things because, for hundreds of thousands of years, finding them meant survival. Nobody needed to be taught to crave sugar. It came pre-installed. Now zoom out even further, past diet, into the bigger question of how food shaped who you are today. Some researchers argue that the shift toward cooked, calorie-dense food didn't just fuel bigger brains. It also freed up time. Chewing raw food, especially tough plant fiber, takes hours every single day. Chimpanzees, your closest living relatives, spend nearly half of their waking hours chewing. Cooking cut that time dramatically for early humans. Suddenly there were extra hours in the day. Hours that weren't spent grinding through fibrous plants with your molars. Hours that could go toward tool-making, socializing, or simply resting. It's a strange thing to trace forward. Somewhere in that extra time, freed up by a pot of boiling roots over a fire, are the roots of language, culture, and eventually, everything you consider modern civilization. All because chewing got easier. Of course, food wasn't only about calories. It was also deeply social. Sharing meat, in particular, appears to have played an outsized role in early human cooperation. A successful hunt produced far more meat than one person or one family could eat before it spoiled. Anthropologists studying modern hunter-gatherer societies, groups whose lifestyles offer clues about ancient behavior, have found that meat sharing wasn't just generosity. It was strategy. Sharing today meant being fed tomorrow, when someone else's hunt succeeded and yours didn't. Food became a kind of social currency, binding groups together through obligation and reciprocity. You can still see faint echoes of this today. Think about how central food is to nearly every human gathering. Holidays, birthdays, first dates, funerals. Someone brings a dish and it means something. That instinct to connect through shared meals didn't come from etiquette books. It came from a much older place, one where sharing food with the right people was quite literally a matter of survival. So where does that leave the modern obsession with finding the correct ancestral diet? A little lost, honestly. Because there was never one correct answer. There was only adaptation. A population living near the Arctic Circle survived on diets almost entirely made of fat and animal protein, out of necessity, with barely any plant matter available for most of the year. A population near the equator lived largely on fruit, tubers, and insects, with meat as an occasional bonus. Both groups were human. Both groups were successful. Neither was following a universal blueprint, because no such blueprint ever existed. This is, in some ways, the most counterintuitive part of the whole story. The version of ancestral eating sold in modern diet books, with its neat rules and clean categories, is actually less accurate than admitting the truth. Humans are built to eat almost anything in almost any combination, depending entirely on where they happen to be standing. That flexibility carried real evolutionary advantages. When a food source disappeared, adaptable humans didn't starve. They shifted. New plants, new animals, new coastlines. Populations that clung too rigidly to one narrow diet were far more vulnerable to extinction when the environment changed. The generalists survived. The specialists often didn't. Which brings us back to you standing in front of the fridge, mildly annoyed that nothing looks appealing despite it being completely full. That flicker of dissatisfaction, that instinct to keep scanning for something better, is not a personal failing. It's an ancient scanning behavior, tuned over hundreds of thousands of years to a world where food was never guaranteed and settling too early could cost you. You open the fridge again. It's still full of strange, modern choices your ancestors never had. But the impulse behind the decision, the quiet calculation of what's safe, what's worth it, what might be good, that part of you is ancient. It was shaping choices around fire pits and riverbanks long before it started staring, mildly disappointed, into refrigerator light.